Hello everyone, I'm Arthur Champeroux from France, and I want to share with you some work that I've done on the topic smartphone privacy and data protection. But beforehand, I want to thank the Odyssey team for organizing this event and for inviting me. Also, a special attention to Mr. Tree that helped me during my university career, and well, thanks again, and I hope everybody has a good time at the ICT Camp edition 4. So I want to share you a document so you can follow with me during the presentation. So I think it's a good start to try to define what a smartphone is real quick. So a smartphone is basically a cell phone with advanced features, feeding itself on data collected during usage. These mobile devices are designed to always follow the user, always on, allowing private companies and public actors to access to an unprecedented amount of information about the user. So obviously, you see this is a data-oriented definition that I made up. But so we are on the same page as what is interesting for us in this presentation. So consequently, smartphones are one of the cornerstones of the data collection within the context of big data revolution. In short, this multifunctional tool connects most humans in most accessible places while processing an exponentially growing amount of data every day. From the constructors to the app platforms, including the app developers, device manufacturers, and third parties, these actors are all gathering information about our daily habits every second through our personal and professional smartphones. These large-scale data collection and processing are justified for legal applications sometimes, or to execute contract of services, to improve service, for marketing profile, etc., etc. A relatively recent global movement of privacy regulation has emerged and wants to set a legal base to propose, like a legal frame, for these practices. Such norms are meant to protect fundamental individual rights and require professionals to respect multiple principles articulated around data protection and privacy. The benefits of using smartphone in daily life became so obvious to most people to the point that this technologic item is now the receptacle of modern privacy. Data protection law is advocating to find a compromise between imposing a sufficient level of privacy protection for consumers and, on the other hand, to enhance economic development through the digital shift taking place at the moment. So here is a short presentation of the actors involved in the data collection and processing. So on the left, these are the individuals from which the data are taken and used for data processing. So we use the common terms of users and consumers, but in legal terms, we talk about data subjects. On the right, private companies and public entities. So these are the app platforms, the app developers, the device manufacturers, third parties, administration, and so on. We distinguish the data controller from the data processor, as the data controller is defining the purpose of the data processing and the means, the ways to do it. So usually it has more responsibility, and data processors are the second plan, in the sense that they are usually employed by data controller, so to speak. It's a shortcut to explain the relationship between the two professional actors, basically. So here comes a series of questions that we will answer through this presentation, and I hope it's understandable. This is made to give you like a sort of, it's a non-exhaustive approach of what are the challenges around smartphone privacy, but I think it's a good start. So we will go from a more technical approach of what is inside the smartphone, what does it do, to a more legal related approach. So these are the two main approaches we will adopt during this analysis. So what constitutes the smartphone ecosystem? So smartphones are composed of both hardware and software components, from the informatic components to the infrastructural aspects of the operating system, the OS. Then we find apps as well in upmarket. Another definition of smartphone, this time more technical. So smartphones are multi-purpose devices equipped with sensing and recording capabilities such as camera, microphone, fingerprint recognition, proximity sensors, gyroscope, accelerometer, and more. These are embedded into the hardware, made available to apps and the OS, the operating system. Mobile OSs are already embedded mechanisms to control and limit the amount of personal information accessed by users' installed apps. This definition is coming from Majid Hatamian. If you want to take his work, the references will be at the end of the presentation. So here are the sensors on the left side of the screen that are usually found on smartphones. It's a lot. It sounds a little bit impressive, but the one thing, the smartphone you have in your pocket is very well equipped, as you can see. It can do a lot of things most humans cannot do, and so we see this technology able to do various amount of things. Apps are definitely one of the key points of smartphones, obviously, as it is the interface between the users and other companies that are offering services. Then when you use a smartphone and it's connected to the internet, for example, well, the data of your daily usage of the smartphone is collected and then processed by companies. This is how they can offer you personalized content, or they can just respond to what you... Oh, sorry. This is a concept that is really pivotal in the privacy and data protection topics. So now a few more numbers to understand the context of what is it to use a smartphone. So you see in 2021, 200 billion apps were downloaded, 26.8 million of developers. Well, this includes also developers doing other technical stuff than for mobile apps, of course, but it is still significant. There are like hundreds, thousands of developers in each upmarket that you see down below. We are interested in mostly the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store that are the biggest upmarkets so far. Well, you see that there are 3.3 million different apps in just Google Play, and then 2.11 million in the Apple App Store. So what kind of personal data is being processed by smartphones? I want to distinguish personal data from non-personal data before moving on. And so to say it shortly, personal data is any data that can be identifiable, that can identify a person specifically. So it's a really large definition. This is the one that is pretty much used by the European Union that just recently produced the GDPR regulation we all heard about, or you probably heard about. So non-personal data cannot be connected to a person anymore. So it's either anonymized or it's not about the person at all. Personal data has to be also distinguished from sensitive data. Sensitive data is a special category of data that is that can harm a person if not used with caution. So we find some data like biometric data, health data, religious beliefs, political ones, cynical data, and so on. So you see all the sensitive matters are gathered in this one category that we call sensitive data. This graphic is just to show you how your phone is processing and sending your data to the companies that are providing you apps. So you see on the left side, Google, that is collecting a lot of your data. Actually, this is the most intrusive one through Android phones, whereas the iPhone is collecting way less data than Google, than the Android phones. Although this doesn't mean much, because if the data it collects is more sensitive, well then the difference is not so big. But still, it's worth to mention that you see Apple trying to implement some privacy policies, even though this is also really critiquable, as we might see later on. So this slide is just to give you an idea of what kind of data is actually being collected on your phone. So on the right, there is the list that was provided by the working party from the EU. I think it's interesting to see that even trivial data are also sent to companies and processed to understand what the user is doing and thinking. So due to the highly personal nature of smartphones, any data collected from them may be classified as personal data, as stated in the Article 24 of the Directive on Privacy and Electronic Communications. I thought it would be interesting to see this sentence, to expose it to you, because the tool itself is changing the very nature of what our data are. Because in other words, if such data were collected in a different way, it would be maybe less critical in terms of how intrusive this data collection is. As our smartphone is always with us, we do pretty much all of our social life is gravitating around this tool, and it gathers pretty much all of our lives. So our way to use smartphones changes the nature of data once again. Here I want you to outline this statement made, and it goes like terminal equipment of users of electronic communications networks and any information stored on such equipment are part of the private sphere of users. These are words from the European Commission, and it underlines the fact that we need protection for pretty much all the data that is coming out of our smartphones, in fact. So here comes the question of what can a smartphone do? This is a non-exhaustive list of what a smartphone can actually do, and well, this can be pretty random, but just so you see all the different types of usage, it's actually really interesting that it can recognize bird songs, but at the same time register the radiation, earthquake, brightness of the sky, and so on. So it really collects a lot of different data for a lot of different services and a lot of different data processing. So now the question of how smartphones are undermining individuals' privacy. Here we see that privacy threats can arise if the user is not aware of the data processing. It's the first point. Or if the data processing is unlawfully achieved here. In spite of the significant efforts made by app developers, there are some widely spread latent issues concerning data processing at the moment, and it's perpetuated by unaware or malicious app developers. Both aspects are to be considered if the app developer himself or herself is not aware of what is threatening for privacy for the users. Therefore, the app developer cannot make a privacy-friendly app. On the other hand, there are some malicious app developers. There has been some examples of developers that that process data without mentioning this to the data subjects, which is more concerning because then you don't exactly know what their intention is. And this is what I mean by the type of malicious app developer behaviors. Here is a key appraisal technique that is using the gyroscope. So based on one sensor on your phone, one app developer can guess what you're typing, for example. It also works with the sensor of the accelerometer. It can guess if you are on the subway, if you walk, so which type of transportation you're using, if you're just mobile or not, if you're on the move, which could be a problem because depending on your transportation kind, well, they can guess your social and economic level, and they can also guess if you're like a person that is walking a lot or not. Then maybe define a sort of profile for your house, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, privacy might be costly for accuracy, in the sense that, well, when you want your data to be, I don't know, less intrusive, to say in a more trivial way, well, you might use some privacy-friendly techniques that are creating noise, we say, to make your data less accurate. Thus, it creates another side effect, that is less accuracy that is coming with this sort of techniques. So as privacy increases, accuracy drops, as you see on the left side of the screen. This is an example from the speech translation technique that you can use with your smartphone. And if your smartphone cannot hear well because of the noise you implemented on your app, to not recognize your voice, for example, and so on, then it might be problematic for your app to actually translate the words you just said. So yeah, you can see that app designs are data-driven in ways that enhance user experience to provide personalized content, which is the interesting side of this technology. It proposes relevant merchandising to consumers, and then they can develop habits. And the main idea is to solicit the most interactions possible with users. So I think it's fair to say that apps are the center of attention for users and the neurologic access point for data collection, both at the same time. The user's behavior is analyzed depending on the purpose determined by the data controller, as well as the data processes. In other words, apps are requiring access to hardware and other apps to proceed to the data collection through smartphones. So here comes three legal challenge about data collection and data processing through smartphones that can be considered as threatening for privacy in a sense. So the first one is raising awareness about data protection rights and data processing. It's a really fundamental step, as I already mentioned in my other presentation about cybersecurity. The second legal challenge, is that a fundamental prism of responsibility of data processing and information security for data, that is supposed to come from data controller, processor, might be lacking sometimes. And thirdly, evolution of personal data categories, considering the smartphone ecosystem. By this, real short, I just want to say that this issue has been growing in, for experts, as I mentioned this earlier, when you use the smartphone to collect so many data about us, this creates a total different approach about what is personal data here. Because what usually was personal data might become sensitive data, for example, as the intensity and the precision of data collection is changing the game. So to get back on the first point, we see that if users are aware of the privacy threats, they can adopt a more protective approach by choosing service providers that are commonly seen as safe, down to an earth-to-earth appreciation of this works. I think apps have to get user permission upon first installation of or first use to access certain sensors like mic and camera, which is not all the time. And actually, some sensors are not even how to say this. Some sensors don't require you to use to accept anything. They don't have to ask for your consent. For example, the previous sensors I mentioned, the gyroscope and the accelerometer, are the types of sensors that are not asking your permission to be used, which is quite problematic when you see the type of wrong it can do to you. Most experts, they believe that awareness in technology and rights would be the foundation of trust for users and enhances digital progress. Besides, awareness should also involve professionals such as app developers, so they could naturally propose privacy-friendly applications. Logically, developing awareness amongst both users and internet service providers, it participates to the enforcement of social normative behaviors and the law, as encourages the use like to use privacy respectful apps, for example, and it spreads the legal awareness of what is legal and what is not, including individual rights and the fact that data controller and processors have responsibilities, so they're aware of their responsibilities, so they can comply to this set of rules, for example. There are many ways to talk about awareness. Well, for example, there has been some awareness campaign led by governments or NGOs and so on. But awareness is also about the consent of the user. Is the user aware of the data processing that is going to take place? Is it safe to use this app because you know it's really intrusive or not? So this brings us to the transparency principle. That is one of the main, one of the key points of awareness. As, it's a legal principle in cornerstone of data protection. It's linked to fairness of that data processing and requires the data controller to provide clear information about the way data is treated. Consecutively, the data controller should provide accessible and clear information about the purpose and the legal basis invoked for that data processing, the time of data conservation, if their personal data is going to be automatically processed, or if they are transfers to third parties. Also, if the data is being transferred abroad. In a similar fashion, I think it's important to mention the automatic decision aspect of data protection regulations. This transparency principle, it applies for automatic data processing and profile scoring. So data subjects commonly shall have access to the general functioning of the automatic processing in order to understand how their profile is treated and to be able to contest in case of unreasonable treatment. In spite of such measures, it can be hard to access to this information because it's directly connected to industrial secrecy, secrecy, as algorithms that are used are protected by law of intellectual property, for example. Besides, explaining the way automatic decisions are taken can be tough when considering that most of these automatic decisions, most of these algorithms are, so we talk about AI here, they're based on a machine learning process involved, and then it becomes difficult to offer adequate information to users, as they might not be familiar with these concepts. Some machine learning techniques are barely explainable by data scientists themselves, especially the ones using deep learning. So before the data processing begins, users must receive clear and comprehensive information in appropriate language in order to be able to consent. I think it's a really common statement that users do not have access to clear information, thus their consent to share personal data is biased, and it might not be juridically acceptable, leading to unlawful data processing. The next slide is about the fundamental prism of responsibility of data processing and information security. Well, basically here, what I want to show you is so among all the persistent difficulties to raise responsible behaviors, it seems to be important to outline a special aspect of responsibility, for which smartphone is an emblematic example. Most data protection regulation is settling the share of responsibility between the data controller, as I said before, and the data processors. As data controller is choosing the technical means and the setting purpose of the data processing. Some sectorial regulations are complicated to apply when it comes to dispatch this responsibility between these two actors. Regarding smartphone apps, upmarket providers are usually considered as data controllers, and app developers would logically be processors. So responsibility for data controllers and processors are, well, it naturally lies in the obligation to ensure technical and organizational security measures to protect access to personal data. Accordingly, app developers shall choose data processors, considering their ability to protect data equally. This dimension of information security englobes the ability to provide confidentiality, integrity, availability, and resilience of processing systems and services. These key concepts are the main standards for data protection, which always has to be considered on the verge of state of the art and analyzed in proportion to the nature, the proportionality of the measure taken, the cybersecurity context I meant. Technical and organizational measures, hard to say, measures they have to prevent the data breach, the data violation, with clear procedures such as organizing backups, control access to personal data, data encryption, and end-to-end secure channels such as TLS, for example. This is one way to classify all the legal responsibilities for app developers. I think it is interesting to see the different main categories of what should be driving app developers when it comes to data protection and users' privacy. And lastly, I think the evolution of personal data categories is also a very important aspect of using a smartphone every day for us, as the specific smartphone ecosystem, it entails new privacy challenges and tends to question the classic conception of data categorization. First of all, the omnipresence of smartphone in every sphere of our society leads to the situation that everyone's privacy is affected, as one does not have to own a smartphone to be recorded by users of smart devices. So you really do not have to have your smartphone in your hand, or to have a smartphone at all, to potentially be recorded by any other smartphone users. This goes further if there are laws protecting privacy within the realm of the private home or certain public spheres. Well, we see that it is also possible to be recorded, well, pretty much everywhere in the public space. So everything happening in the public area may be recorded, and the very nature of the data collection that is permanent and processed through smartphone with such level of precision is creating a really like unprecedented situation. So the technological improvements are leading to two major shifts, in my opinion: the movement of personalization of any type of data, and the increased sensitivity of formerly common data. And so that means that what was not personal data in the past could be considered as personal data, considering the intensity of data collections through smartphone and the capacity of calculation and storage. That is also affecting the precision of what is data. As a result, non-personal data might effectively become identifiable as well. So every day, your smartphone is tracking you where you are, how long you were there, who you've contacted, and what you search for. Then again, the intensity and precision of data collection can affect privacy. This can raise serious questions when personal data are shifting to sensitive personal data. In conclusion, I want to say that overall, the personal nature of data tends to evolve drastically towards a more invasive impact of the data collection, both making sets of data a possible tool to identify individuals, and by adding informational value to personal data, to the point that it gives sensitive information. Thus, non-personal data becomes personal data, and regular type of data transform into sensitive data. As of today, the main challenge is to find a balance between data protection regulation, and so it combines both privacy and information security, to user experience, in the sense that we don't want privacy to weigh too much on the user experience, and so the companies will be affected negatively by this data protection approach. Some solutions are proposed by diverse entities that are rather technical, following the privacy by default and by design. As a matter of fact, researchers try to conceive different tools to enhance privacy. There are some experimental works that assess the different cyber threats of certain data, such as location privacy, such as location data, sorry. There are some concrete solutions that are brought to these aforementioned issues. Also, the voice is a very sensitive data now that is being recorded by smartphones and by all the vocal assistants you might have heard. So even though we can observe that there are some improvements or some initiative made by some, well, mostly scientists and some big companies such as Google or Apple. There is a huge gap between the data protection regulation and technical and organizational measures implemented in reality. So in spite of such a cynical conclusion, I think it sounds necessary to underline that the technological acceleration is a very new phenomenon, especially for the legal adaptation, all things considered. Therefore, long-lived legal principles still have their roles to play in this transition, although our wish is not to fall for the unreasonable proposition of a price for our privacy. These were my thoughts that I also translated into a paper. If you want to read more about this, it will also be available soon. Thanks again for listening. I hope you learned a few things, and thank you. Thanks to Odyssey team once again, and I hope you have a great and interesting camp at SimRep. I wish I was there with you to meet you and to answer some questions, but you can also contact me via my email that Mr. Tree possesses. Anyway, goodbye and thank you again.